Hey everybody, Rob here from the DAE. Welcome back to another stream. I hope you're all having a great day so far. We're going to do another Python project in processing. So yesterday we looked at creating some shapes and making them move. We had looked at using some if statements to check to see if a shape has moved off screen. What we're going to do today in processing is we're going to look at creating some interactivity using the keyboard to make things move on screen. We're going to keep this really simple, probably just use one shape to start. We're going to look at a couple of different ways to do that. And if we have time, we may introduce the if statement again. So if you move an object off screen, it resets its position back on screen. Nothing too crazy, just want to introduce some new functions that are going to be really useful for making controls. This is going to start to set the stage for making a simple game. We may end up making some kind of maze game or something like that. I'm not entirely sure what it's going to turn out to be. But for today, we're not going to actually make any game in its entirety. We're just going to look at creating controls. Now, before we get started, I just want to remind everyone that we are using processing. Processing can be downloaded from processing.org. I am using the Python version or Python mode in processing. By default, when you download and install processing, it uses Java mode. That's written in Java. We can add a Python mode by simply clicking on this drop down and selecting add mode. And we would want to download or install this Python mode. The only other thing you want to be sure of is that when you are working in processing, let me just make a new file here so I can show you what it is I'm talking about. If this is in Java, you're going to want to make sure you switch that to processing. Otherwise, if you start writing code in Python when you're in Java mode, processing is going to have no idea what you're doing. As I did yesterday, I have the reference guide for processing. That is py.processing.org/reference. This will give us all of the different functions and commands we can use in processing. I need this because, as I've mentioned over and over again, I am no expert. I'm no computer scientist. I am merely someone who enjoys writing some code. I'm always learning new things. As you've seen in some of my other videos, I'm probably going to make a lot of mistakes today. That's okay. Because I've got the reference guide to try and figure it out. And anything I don't figure out, I will always try to figure out and then correct my mistakes in a future video. But today we're going to work with some new functions in processing and talk about using keyboard input to move things. So let's get started with this. The first thing I want to do is just quickly set up a sketch. So we're going to use our setup function. If you remember from yesterday, setup runs only once and it sets up your scenario. In our case, all we're going to do is set the screen size. And what we saw yesterday was 1,000 by 1,000. Works pretty nicely. Then we have our draw function. And I'm just going to make a shape. Remember, we had lots of different commands for shapes. We have arc, circle, ellipse, line, point, quad, rect, square, triangle. We're going to just use the ellipse shape. And if you recall from yesterday, ellipse takes 4 parameters. The first 2 are the x and y coordinates of where we'd like that shape to be drawn on screen. And the second 2 are the x and y values for its size. So its width and its height. So we're going to make this, let's just put this dead center of the screen, 500 by 500. And I'm going to stick with 50 and 50 for the size. And we have got ourselves a circle in the middle of the screen. Very good. Now, we're going to make a background. We can put the background in either the setup or the draw function. We're going to put it in setup first, background, and our background function can take a few different parameters. We're going to go with RGB, and if you recall from yesterday, processing has a color selector built into its tools that will stay floating on top of your project, which is super awesome. I'm going to choose kind of a limey green color, so my RGB values are going to be 74, 252, and 105. And what's great about our color selector is, well, it's actually supposed to stay on top of the window. For whatever reason, it's not right now, but that's okay. We can just move it off to the side. That's really weird. That's the first time I've ever seen the color selector not stay on top of the window, but whatever, computers can be weird. So now we've got ourselves a nice limey background, and we can go ahead and fill this shape Again, this takes RGB values, so let's get our color selector up again. And I think we want a reddish color so it really stands out. Let's grab, I don't know, kind of a dark red. That works for me. So here are our values. We'll go ahead and fill those 234, 86, and 78. So now we've got a little red circle sitting on a green background. The other thing I would like to do, actually I'm not going to do that yet. So what I want to do first is just reintroduce how we created movement. So we're going to create a variable called xpos and have that equal to 0, and a variable called ypos, and that equals 0. Just a quick reminder, a variable is just something that holds information that we can pull up later. These two variables are going to hold the positions of our ellipse, and then we're going to change the numbers in those variables, so we will make the object move on screen. So we've created our variables. Now we need to declare those as global variables. Oop, that's not right. In our draw function. If we don't declare these as global variables in our draw function and we use the xpos and ypos variables in this function without global, Python will get confused and think we're trying to use new variables called xpos and ypos because they don't necessarily exist the same way in different functions. But by using global, it's telling Python that it's the same variable that we declared up at the top. So in our ellipse, we're going to change the x value for the ellipse's position to the variable xpos, and the y value for the ellipse's position as ypos. So Python's basically saying, okay, when I'm drawing this ellipse, I'm just going to take whatever number is stored inside of these variables, which for the time being is 0. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to increment these variables by 5 pixels, so we get things moving. So xpos plus equals 5, ypos plus equals 5. And if I run this, my shape now moves across the screen, right? And it moves all the way down, and that's all good and well. Now, notice it leaves our little trail of ellipses as this goes. The reason that that's happening, and we explained this briefly yesterday, but let's quickly go over it again. In the setup function, the size of our canvas is drawn at 1,000 by 1,000 pixels, and the background color is drawn at this color, and then we're done with setup. And then our draw function loops. It loops over and over again. So basically, what's happening is we are creating a fill and then drawing a shape in a certain position, and then we are moving that shape. And then this whole thing starts over again. And it's just drawing a new shape, a new shape, a new shape, a new shape. It's not actually moving our ellipse. It's redrawing it in another position. And they're stacked on top of each other, right? They're stacked like, you know, if we were to cut a circle and put it on the table and then cut a circle out of paper and then put it slightly over and do the same over and over again, we'd end up with this same kind of pattern of these circles stacked on top of each other. That's essentially what's happening. So we're not actually creating movement. We are drawing new ellipses. That's not going to work very well if we're making a game. So what we may want to do is move our background out of the setup function and put it into the draw function. So that way, every time it restarts the loop, it's redrawing the background on top of the previous ellipse and then drawing a new ellipse, then a new background on top of it, then a new ellipse. And what that's doing is it's simulating movement because we're not getting the stamping or the cloning or tiling of that shape, okay? So very cool. So off to a good start. What we had done yesterday is we had put an if statement in this draw function that says if the ellipse, if the xpos and ypos exceeds 1,000, then it's going to reset its position back to the corner. We'll probably do that later, but for now we're going to skip that. So what we want to do now is we want to create some movement using keys. We want to use the arrow key. So first thing, I'm going to change my xpos and ypos variables so that the ellipse starts in the middle of the screen. Okay. I'm also going to get rid of these. So now I've basically just got my ellipse in the middle of the screen. Let's take a quick look at the different functions that we have in our documentation about how we can deal with keys. So there's a section called keyboard, and there's a few different functions. We've got key, key coded, key pressed, then key pressed as a function, key released as a function, and key typed as a function. So we're going to first look at key pressed, then we're going to look at the key pressed and key released functions. Okay, so key pressed is a Boolean system variable that checks to see if any key is pressed, and it's true if a key is pressed and false if no keys are pressed. Okay, so basically what this key pressed keyword does is anytime you put any kind of input into the keyboard, it's going to return true. Let's take a look at what other things we have. So we also have this key keyword, which checks to see which key is pressed. The system variable key always contains the value of the most recent key on the keyboard that was used, either pressed or released. And if you look at the example here, one way that we can make things move is we can use the key pressed keyword, which returns true if a key is pressed. And then nested within that, we can check to see if the key was a certain key. And if it was a certain key, we can make things happen. So in other words, the first step of this is a key pressed? And then if that condition is met, we check to see if another condition is met within that. So if we get yes on the first condition, then we check, is the key, let's make it the letter D. If the letter D is pressed, then we can do something within our code, which is how we're going to start with this. So if key pressed, if key double equals, and then we have to put the key that we're checking in quotes. It needs to be a string, otherwise Python doesn't know what we're doing. I'm going to use the letter D because eventually we're going to use WASD to make this move. Then what we can do is we can change the X position by 5. So we're doing all the same stuff we did before. We're drawing the background, we're filling the shape, we're drawing the shape. Then we're checking to see if any key is pressed on the keyboard, and if it is, we're checking to see if that key is the letter D. If it's not, nothing's going to happen. If it is, we're going to change the X position by 5. So let me run this. So I get some nice movement there. Very good. Let's check if another key is pressed. Key equals, let's put the letter A in. Then we will change X pos by -5. So, whoops, that's not the right code. So now, make things move. Now, one thing, you'll notice that the shape is kind of going a little crazy. I'm pressing different keys on the keyboard, and it's getting really out of whack and confused, okay? That's because using this key pressed and then checking the key to create this movement is not the most efficient way to make this work. There's a much better way. I'm going to actually put in all the other controls, and we're going to see how this works. Let's use W and S for up and down. And then we're going to change the Y position by minus equals 5. Whoops. Minus equals. Wow. And we'll then we'll do oh, that's not right. I don't need a colon there. Then we'll do elif key equals double equals S, and then we'll change the Y position by a positive 5. So now I can move in all 4 directions, but I'm pressing the keys in sequence. Like, I can't get this thing to move diagonally. I'm going to hold the keyboard up a little bit so hopefully you can see. But if I press like W and D at the same time, it does not move diagonally. It has to move one of those directions. And that's not really helping me here, because what if I want to move in a diagonal line? Well, this code is not the most efficient way to write this, and it's clearly not functioning correctly. So we're going to scrap this, and we're going to write the code another way. And again, I am no expert with this, but as I've learned from our extremely talented instructors at Digital Arts Experience and knowledgeable, that there's a more efficient way to do this. That was the way I was always writing the code, by the way. That was how I thought was the right way. And then a couple of our awesome instructors showed me a better way to do this. And I learned this just recently. And this morning I actually forgot how to do this and had to relearn it again. And I think it's going to work properly. But what we're going to do is we're going to use the key, where's our keyboard? The key pressed and key released functions, okay? These functions are not written in draw. They're written outside of draw. The key pressed function is a function called once every time a key is pressed. The key that was pressed is stored in the key variable, okay? Because of how our operating system handles it, holding down a key may cause multiple calls to key press and key release. The rate of, all right, so that just has to do with how quickly our computer processes this. But basically, we have a separate function called key pressed, and then a separate function called key released. So when we press a key, it calls any code in the key pressed function. When you release a key, it calls any code in the key released function. The way I learned this, and I don't think I can explain this as well as one of our actual programming instructors, but what we want to do is in the draw function, we don't want to be doing any checking to see if any keys are pressed or released. All we want to handle in the draw function is the movement. So what we're going to do is we're going to set 4 variables to contain a Boolean, which is either true or false, on or off, 1 or 0, okay? And each of those variables, I'm going to call them WASD. Each of those variables is going to be set to false. Then in the key pressed function, we're going to check to see if any of those keys were pressed. And if they were, then we're going to change the value of our Boolean variables to true. So as soon as processing detects that a key is pressed, and I'm actually in the wrong documentation here. As soon as processing detects that a key is pressed and it's the correct key, the Boolean goes to true. In the draw function, then, all we're going to do is check to see if the variable's true, and if it's true, then it's going to move the object. So all of the key press stuff is handled outside of draw. All we're doing in the draw function is checking to see if it's true or false. Let's go ahead and get this all set up. So I'm going to create 4 variables, W, A, S, D. W will have us go up, A down, S to the left, D to the right. And those variables are going to be equal to false. And it's false with a capital F. They're all going to be equal to false. And before we do anything, I'm going to just write the code for the letter D to make the object move to the right. And we'll check to make sure it works before I write all the rest of it. Okay. So what we need to do now below draw is we need to call the key pressed function. Key pressed. Right? And then we are going to check to see if the key is equal to the letter D. And if it is, then we are going to set the variable D to true. So we start, and I'm missing something really important. I need to declare this as a global variable, or else it won't work properly. It'll think I'm using a totally different variable for the letter D. So the variable D contains false. In our key pressed function, we bring our variable in, and then we check to see, so the key pressed will activate anytime a key is pressed on the keyboard, and then we check to see if the key is the letter D. If it is, then we have the variable D set to true, which then means in my draw function, I'm going to add the variable D to my little global line here. I'm going to check if D is true, then I can change the X position by 5. So this section handles the key input, this section just handles the movement. So if I run this and I haven't made any mistakes, I press the key and my shape moves. Now, I don't know if you just saw what happened, but I'm going to pull up the keyboard so you can see this. Here's my keyboard. If I press the letter D, the shape starts moving and it doesn't stop. That's because nowhere in my code am I telling Python that I want D, the variable D, to go back to false when I let go of the key. That's where the key released function comes in. So this does the opposite. It activates when a key is released. So what we can do in this case is we can actually write almost the identical code. If key equals D, then I'll set D back to false. So in other words, I press the D key. The variable D becomes true, which in my draw function tells me to start moving the shape by 5 pixels. When I release the key released function is activated, and that, when we check to see if the key is D, if it's the letter D, it sets the variable D back to false, which shuts this line of code off, essentially. So let's test this and make sure it works. Forgot something. Okay. Now you can see I can move the shape, and as soon as I release the key, it stops. Excellent. So we're on the right track. Let's put the rest of the code in and see if we can get this working properly. So we have our variables all set up here. What I need to do now is let's do the A key to move the other direction. So we have 2 variables, right? And then we need to use all of those variables throughout all of these different functions. So then we're going to check to see if key equals, I could probably do this with elif. Well, let's try that first. Okay, yeah. Then we're going to, elif is else if. So it's if the key is D, do this, else if the key is this, do that. So we're going to set A to true. And then over here, if key is equal to the letter A, then we're going to set the variable A to false. And then over here, again, I think we can do this with an elif. A equals true. Then we're going to change the X position minus equals 5. So let's see if that works. I think that works pretty well. Just for argument's sake, I'm going to put these all in separate ifs and see if that makes any difference. So it does make a little bit of a difference. I'm going to put this back. And I'm not sure exactly why. This is where my understanding of all of the logic of code starts to get a little limited. Okay, so that's really interesting. So what's happening right now when I've got it written with the elifs, if I press the D key, and while holding D I press A, it continues to move to the right. If I press the A key, and then I press the D key, it moves back the other direction. If I separate these all out into ifs instead of elifs, if I press the left key and then let me take a step back. If I press A and then press D, it stops the object. I'm pressing both keys at the same time, and that works in both ways. That's really more what I want. I want to be able to activate all 4 of these at the same time. I think if we're using elif, there's sort of an order to the way that it's checking to see which key is pressed, and that's making the controls a little wonky. So it looks like we want to do this all in separate ifs. I'd love to know if anybody has any knowledge as to why that might be better, but I'm going to write them all in separate ifs for now, and then we'll see how the controls work. So let's continue on with this. So we need to use all of our variables. So I'm going to put them all in. I'm going to put in WASD in each one of these global lines. WASD. Same thing here. WASD. Okay. Then in our key pressed function, we need if key equals, we'll use W, and we're going to set W to true, and then we'll put in if key equals S, because we've done DAWS. Whoop, that's not right. We're going to set S to true. And then down here, we're going to do the same thing. If key, I could probably copy and paste some things, but That's okay. I will do this the old school way. If W key equals W, then we're going to set W to false again. This is in the key released. And then if key equals S, we're going to set S to false again as well. So now in both the key pressed and the key released, I get either a true or false depending if the key is pressed or not pressed. Now we need to just add the movement up here. So if, let's put in W equals true, we are going to make the shape go up, which is going to be Y pos minus equals 5. And then if S equals true, then we'll change the Y pos positively. And this should now, I can now move diagonally, which was the issue I was having before when I had written the code in a different way. So now I have this nice smooth movement. We can increase the speed simply by increasing these numbers. So let's make them 10. And actually, I've got a really fun thing that we can do. Right? So if we run this, now we move much faster. I'm kind of liking the speed of 5. All right. Let's try something. This should be fun. Let's take the background function and take it out of the draw function. Oh, I never saved my project. That's not good. So I'm just going to call this. I should have done that in the beginning. That was sloppy, and I apologize. So let's take that out and pop that in here. And then I think what I'd like to do is no stroke. And so now we basically have kind of like an Etch-a-Sketch, which is really cool. Kind of like a snake game. That's cool. All right, cool. So that's kind of neat. Let's do 2 more things. We have time to do 2 more things, I think. I've got some interesting ideas. First thing is, let's keep the project the way it is, and we will, let's see. I think what we'll do is, let's have a key to clear it. That sounds good. Let's have a key to clear it. Okay, so in our draw function, in this case, we can use the if key pressed, because all this is going to do is going to be something that we're going to tap. Not going to be a big deal. If key pressed, if key equals C, we'll use the C key to clear the screen. We'll clear the screen, and then we have to redraw the background. If I don't redraw the background, it turns black, okay? So we need to redraw the background of the same color. That happens because we're only drawing the background once in the setup function. And if we clear it in the draw function, it doesn't redraw the background of the correct color. So now we can draw, and the C key. Now, the other thing that might be interesting too would be to reset the shape, our drawing shape, back to the center. So I think that's a good idea. We'll set X pos back to 500 and Y pos back to 500. So basically, we can draw. Oh, I just put a extra letter in here. I started the controls too quickly. So we can draw, right? And then if I hit C, it takes us back to the middle. That's pretty cool. All right, so that's cool. We've got ourselves a little bit of like an Etch-a-Sketch drawing program here. I think I would like to allow the user to change the color of our drawing shape. And I think I'd like to do that with keys on the keyboard, and I think I'd like to make them random colors. So I'm kind of thinking we'll use the number keys 1 through 0. So we have 10 keys, 1 through 0. And any of those keys will bring up a different color, or we can, let's do this. Let's do this. This will be fun. I'm going to use the E key to clear the screen for erase, right? Then what we'll do is use the C key we'll use the C key to change the color. And I think what I'd like to do is have it randomize the color. So here's what we'll do. I'm going to create 3 more variables. R, G, and B. So we can now use these variables in the fill function of our shape. So actually, what I think we'll do is set these values to the current color of the shape, so it starts the same color. So I'm just copying and pasting these in. And then down here, I can just put R, G, B, and I just need to make these global, okay? So now it's the same color. What we'll do now is I'm thinking about this a couple different ways. We could do the same thing with the true and false in key pressed and key released. Or we can try and use this. If key, because this doesn't deal with smooth movement or anything like that, it's just going to deal with changing the color. I think we can do it right in here. So in that same key pressed keyword, the if key pressed in our draw function, we're going to check to see if the key is E, in which case we're going to clear, redraw the background, and reset the position. If the key is C, we are going to reset the variables R, G, and B to a random number between 0 and 255. Now, let's go to our documentation for a second, and we're just going to look at the random function. So random is a function, generates random numbers. Each time the random function is called, it returns an unexpected value within the specific range. If only one parameter is passed to the function, it will return a float between 0 and the value of the high parameter. So let's just break that down. We call the random function, and we can either put in 1 or 2 numbers. If we put in 1 number, the random function assumes that our range is going to be a random number from 0 to whatever the number you put in is. So in our case, I'm going to put 255. So we're picking a random number between 0 and 255. If I wanted it to be between 100 and 255, I can put a number that represents the lower limit of our range. But if it's 0 and 255, I don't even need to bother. A float is it's not an integer, it's a number with a decimal. So it will give us a number with a decimal between 0 and 255. We could round that to the nearest integer. We can use the int function to round that to the nearest integer. I don't think that's an issue. That would look like this. I would say int random 255. So basically it's generating a random number with a decimal from 0 to 255, and then the int function is rounding that. I don't think it really makes a difference in this case, so I'm going to leave it. So all we have to do is set our numbers all to a random number from 0 to 255, right? So let's see what happens here. So we're drawing. I press C and we change to a random number. I press C, and then I can actually hold it down. Oh, so I can't hold it while I'm drawing, while I'm moving. So it will be random. Interesting. If I'm moving in a line and then I press the key, it will allow me to change random colors while I'm drawing. But if I press the key and then start moving, it disables that. I think if we wanted that to run simultaneously, we would have to put our randomization into these key pressed functions. That's interesting. And then, of course, I can clear this and go back. And what we should do, notice how it didn't reset the color? It stays the color. Maybe we should reset our colors back to these. So maybe in our if the E key to erase the screen is pressed, we'll add these, oops, that didn't indent correctly. We'll add these variables back in so it resets it. So in other words, we start with our normal color. I can press the C key and I can randomize my colors. There we go. Wow, I think some really, really weird things are happening. It resets to the normal color when I press E, but the really weird thing that's happening is if I'm moving diagonally and I press the C key, it continues changing the color until I release something. So that isn't functioning exactly the way as it should, and I think that's a result of not using the key pressed and key released function, which means I think we're going to need to do this the right way. Let's do it in our remaining time. It's interesting to see the different ways that these work. Let's do this in our remaining time. We'll set the C key up correctly. The E key I don't really care about because we're just tapping that and resetting our screen. But the C key, I think we're going to need to do this the correct way, which means we need to actually create more variables. So we're going to change these RGB variables to rval, gval, and bval. And then we're going to create RGB as Booleans. Right? So they're going to be equal false. Same thing here. False. That's not how you spell false. And false. Right? And so now, what we're going to do is, I'm going to get rid of this. I'm going to get rid of this. Yep. Okay. Now, we have our, let's see, I need to change these to be our values. Rval, gval, bval. And of course, I need to declare all these global. A lot of variables in this, okay? And then these I need to reset to the new variable. These new variables actually contain the color. The variables RGB are going to contain true or false. So, in our key press function, we're going to say if key equals C for color, we're going to set R to true. Oh, we only need one. We only need one of these. Wow, okay, all right. So I totally made this way more complicated than needs to be. I'm going to call this color state. That sounds really complicated, but wow, I way overcomplicated this. I am so sorry about that. I only need one variable that to be true or false. I don't need to check 3 for each RGB value. That's not needed because it's only one key. If it was 3 separate keys, I would need the 3 separate Boolean variables. I just need the one. Wow, okay. Color state. And we'll do the same thing here. We're going to include color state. And same thing here. Color state. Wow, okay. Color. So basically what we're doing is if the C key is pressed, we're going to set color state to true. And if the C key is released, we're going to set color state back to false, right? Just like we did with movement. So we have a variable called color state that's checking to see if our C key is pressed. I could call it C state. That might be a little bit more simple, but that's okay. And then I have variables that actually contain my RGB values, okay? So what we're doing first is in the key pressed function, we're checking to see if the key C is pressed, and if it is, then our Boolean variable color state is going to be set to true. When that key is released, if key equals C, we're going to reset the color state to false. Now, what that means here is in our if statement, we're going to check if, in our draw function, if color state equals true, then we're going to set rval, gval, and bval to random between 0 and 255. And we're going to see how this functions instead. We still have our if key pressed within the draw function because that's just to erase. We don't care about that. Now we have what should be the proper way to write this to get better function. Assume I didn't do anything wrong. All right, so now, yeah, see, now I can hold this and draw. As soon as I let go of it, it stops. It doesn't get locked on like it did before. This is much better. Yeah, this functions much more smoothly. So it really does pay to write the extra code and use the key pressed and key released functions, because things don't get glitchy when different keys are pressed. When I had done it the other way, it got really glitchy if I was holding down certain keys. Now this runs really smooth. So this is definitely the right way to do this. Okay, so now I'm going to save this. We've got ourselves this drawing program. We can now do a couple of things. I'm not sure what. One of two. One is we can change the size of our drawing shape. Maybe using the... I could try the plus and minus keys. We'll see if those work. The other thing we can also do is we can change our speed. Also maybe with the plus and minus keys. I think I'd like to do the size. Let's do the size. Okay, I think that sounds good. I'm gonna actually put this on a new line because it's just extending out too far. That's just me being nitpicky. All right, so let's change the size of our code, of our drawing shape using a similar process. I'm going to try the plus and minus keys. We'll see if it recognizes that properly. So we have two keys. I'm going to put this in the key pressed and key released function as well, so we can actively change our size while we're drawing. So I'm going to put size up equals false and size down equals false. So these variables are going to check to see, those are our Boolean variables to check if the key is pressed. Okay. The other thing I need to do is I need to set variables for that contain the size of our shape. So I'm going to put X size and Y size just because that's easier to understand. And we start with a size of 50, right? So I'm going to set them as 50 to start out with. We need to add these to our global deal. So X size. I'm going to put them on a new line. That's fine. Put them on a new line. So we'll put global X size, Y size, and then we need the other two, I think, as well. Size up and size down. Size up, size down. And we're going to need to do the same in our key pressed and key released functions. But before we do that, in our ellipse, we can no longer have these numbers to increase our size. So I'm going to put X size and Y size. I'm going to size the X and Y values together so it's always a circle. We could actually make this even crazier and be able to change the X size and Y size of this ellipse separately, which would mean we could start drawing in ovals and other cool shapes. Maybe we'll add that at another point, but in the interest of time, I think we're going to stick to just scaling it as a circle uniformly, okay? So now if we run this, we have the right size here, even though we no longer have the 50 here because our variable X size and Y size contains 50, and that's in here, which is very good. Okay, so now let's work with the key pressed and key released. So I need, let's see, I need size up and size down in both of these. So size up and size down in both my key pressed and key release function. Good. And then what we'll do is we will do what we've done all along. We'll say if key equals, and I think I'm going to put, that's actually the plus key, because in order to write a plus sign, you need to hold shift. So even though it's the equal sign, that's going to be the key that has the plus sign on it. So that will still work. We're going to set size up to true, not double equals, single equals. And then we'll check if key equals, and then there's our minus sign, we're going to say SizeDown equals true. And then we're going to do the same exact thing down below, and I'm just going to copy and paste in the interest of time. And just change these trues to false. 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 All right. Now, in our draw function, we are going to say if size up equals true, we are going to set our x size, which is the size of our ellipse, plus equals 1, and y size plus equals 1. And then we'll do the same thing with SizeDown, except we will make the x size get smaller and the y size get smaller. So let's see if this works correctly. So I'm drawing, and I can increase the size and decrease the size as we go. Cool. Now, one thing you'll notice, see how it like shrinks down and then, hold on, let's see if I can demonstrate this. It kind of shrinks down and then opens up again. That's because the numbers are inversing each other and they're negative numbers. We need to actually put something in here to make sure we don't ever, although that is a really cool pattern, I'd like to put something in our draw function that allows us to never exceed a certain size. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to put another if statement, and we're going to say if x size is greater than 100 and y size is greater than 100, x size equals 100 and y size equals 100. So basically what I'm saying is we're pressing the plus sign to make our size bigger. If our size exceeds 100, it can't get larger than 100. So we've basically put a limit on how large this can be. Then we'll do the same thing if x size is less than 1 and y size is less than 1, then we were going to set x size and y size to 1, right? Same thing we did before. And so now we can't get smaller than 1. So let's see if this works properly. So here we go. That's as big as I can get. I'm still pressing plus, can't get any bigger. Let's go down. That's 1 pixel, can't get any smaller. So that's great. Now, if I was able to scale the x and y sizes independently, so I could make an oval, I wouldn't want to have and here, I would want to have or, because I'd want to check to see if either one of them was exceeding and then resetting them. But in our case, because we're scaling uniformly, this will totally work. So now in my drawing program, I can move around, I can increase my size, and then I can randomize my color. Right, then I can shrink down to as small as we go, and then I'll draw a little line, and then we can randomize the color. And it looks, when it's down to 1 pixel in size, it actually looks really cool when we're randomizing the color. It's like this weird trail. Let's make it a little bit larger. Check it out now. There's our tiling going on, right? And then when I'm ready to restart my drawing program, E erases it and brings it back to the middle. So I think that's going to be it for today. We did a lot of stuff. I threw a lot of stuff at you. But let's just recap. We'll spend about 5 minutes here just going over everything that we did. So today we focused on creating movement with keys. And first we looked at using the keyword if key pressed to create keys. I used WASD. We could have used the arrow keys. And if you recall, when we had written the code using the key pressed keyword within the draw function, it was really glitchy and didn't work correctly. So what we did is we introduced the key pressed function and the key released function. The key pressed function is activated automatically anytime the computer detects that a key is pressed. Doesn't matter what key. You could press any key on the keyboard and it activates the key pressed function. Within the key pressed function, we check to see which key is pressed by using the keyword. So we say if the key equals a letter, a number, the arrow keys, the space bar, the delete key, whatever. And then we do the inverse with key released. So the key released function is activated anytime a key is released on the keyboard. It doesn't matter which one. That's important because I might be holding down the button to move to the right and then let go the button to move up. So it detects the key released when I let go of the up button, but even though I'm still holding down the other key, and they work totally independently of each other. So at any rate, key release is activated when you let go of a key on the keyboard, and when that's activated, it checks to see which key is pressed, again using the key function. Now, in the key pressed and key released function, we did not deal with any movement. All we did is have some variables that detect the state of whether or not the key is pressed. So what that means is our WASD variables are containing Booleans, true or false, yes or no, on or off, 1 or 0. So in our key pressed function, all we're doing is changing the Boolean value from false to true when we're pressing the key, and then as soon as we release, it changes true to false. In our draw function, all we need to do is check to see if that variable is true or false, and then we can handle dealing with the movement. So it's separating checking for the key press and actually dealing with the movement. So pretty useful. And as you saw, we were able to make very smooth, glitch-free motion using that, right? In addition to that, we had created some variables to deal with the position and size of our ellipse. So basically, we can change the position when certain keys are pressed, and we can change the size when certain keys are pressed. Again, just variables. We used the same key pressed and key released to change the size. And in addition to that, we also randomized the color. We used the C key to change the color. So we had a color state variable that was a Boolean, starts as false. If we press any key on the keyboard and that key is C, it changes our color state to true. And then when we release the C key, it changes it to false. Then in our draw function, we can check to see if color state is true. Then we introduced the random function, right? And our random function was just like what we had done in idle, which was random.randint, but in processing, we don't need to import a random library, and we don't need the random.randint. All we need to do is call the random function, which, if we remember from our documentation, creates a float, which is a number with a decimal. If you only put one parameter into this function, it automatically assumes that you want a random number between 0 and 255. If we didn't want it to be 0, I can put a 5 or a 2 or a 10 or 100 or whatever, and then it would pick a random number from 5 to 255 or whatever that first number is. And if we needed to deal with integers, we can always put the int function around this, like so, and that would then round, and we would end up with an integer. And all of that came from the documentation. It says it right here. To convert a floating point random number to an integer, use the int function, and we can see that applied right here. So, and then the other thing we did is we used the E key to clear the screen, reset the background, and reset the position and color of everything. And because that's not something that is like a repeated motion, like we're not holding the key down, you just tap it and make it happen, I thought that it would be fine to put that in the draw function using the key pressed keyword. I mean, if we were really doing this by the books, I guess we could also create a Boolean that would check the state of the key E, just like we did with everything else. I found that to be unnecessary because it was just a simple function. But we ended up with a pretty darn cool drawing program. Change the size, change the color. I can change the color and the size. Whoa, where did my shape go? Ah, there it is. I went super far off screen. The other thing that I probably should do is I probably should not allow the shape to go off screen. That might be something we can add in a future lesson. But for now, that's it. I think this is a pretty cool drawing program. Didn't really have much of a plan going into the project for today. I really just wanted to focus on using the key pressed and the key released functions. But at any rate, I hope you enjoyed this lesson. Keep in mind, we have tons of great online lessons in processing and Python and Java, as well as a ton of other subjects like graphic design, 3D modeling, with Blender, 3D modeling with Tinkercad, tons and tons of other things. We also offer virtual private lessons, so if you're interested in that, definitely get in touch. We've got a great team of instructors here that can help you remotely. But at any rate, I really appreciate you joining me for today, and I will look forward to seeing you all this afternoon. Thanks, and have a great day.